Welcome to the Vantage Fit Corporate Wellness Podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Vantage Fit, the all-in-one AI-powered corporate wellness platform developed by Vantage Circle.
Hello everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Vantage Fit Corporate Wellness Podcast. I'm your host Dipshi, and today I have with me the founder of the Society of Happy People, Pamela Johnson. So today we're going to have a discussion on the topic of practical happiness in the workplace. Also, Pamela here will throw some insights on her book, Practical Happiness, 4 Principles to Improve Your Life. Welcome to the show, Pamela.
Thank you for having me on.
We are so glad to have you here. So shall we begin with the session?
Of course.
That's great. So tell us about your journey in the area of wellness.
Well, it started when I was working in the mental health and self-help field 20 plus years ago. I wasn't a therapist or a counselor, but I did what they called alumni relations. And so I always made a joke that I got the patients when they were now newly sober. It was I worked at an addiction center initially. And then I just kind of started asking myself, where are all the happy people? Because people were spending a lot of money and time to try to improve their outlook on life and how they felt, and they were participating in wellness. But a lot of people at the time just really still weren't feeling happy. So I wondered where they were, and that led me to actually start a group called the Society of Happy People. We actually started out calling ourselves the Secret Society of Happy People because people kind of kept happiness a secret. And, but we evolved. At our 20 years, we decided we weren't a secret anymore. So I've just been in the area of happiness for over 2 decades now, helping people find a little more happiness. And I define that by when you naturally feel good. And so sometimes we think of happiness as having fun or humor or some very high vibration types of happiness. But happiness can also be when we just feel peaceful, or when we're feeling content, or we're feeling even relief, like you finish a work project and you're relieved it's done. Sometimes happiness, we sometimes feel just a little bit better when we have other emotions that show up.
Exactly. Even I believe happiness can be found in a variety of things, right? So it's very subjective, don't you think?
Yeah, exactly. And that's actually the first principle of my new book, Practical Happiness. Happiness is personal, and it's also personal to you at any given moment in time. If you didn't sleep well last night and you woke up, and you had your very busy day, you probably, happiness for you is like just when you get home and you have 5 minutes of quiet, or you get to sit and meditate, or you get to take a little cat nap, whatever that is, just to give you a little recharge. That's your idea of happiness. On the other hand, if you were working at home alone all day and you're just, you've been on your computer and you're a bit alone, sometimes your idea of happiness is when you get to have your family dinner and you're getting to have chit chat and you're listening to laughing, or you go meet friends. So happiness, it really ebbs and flows depending on the situation.
It varies from person to person, right?
Exactly. And it's different for different people.
So when we're talking about practical happiness, so is it any different from the normal term happiness which we often use, or are the two words mean the same thing?
Well, I sort of think happiness is happiness, meaning happiness is when we feel I like to say naturally good. So when we feel naturally good, and sometimes that's a little bit of a stair step. And I think that's where the practical comes in. Practical happiness is about those feel-good moments, but it's also about managing what I call happiness zappers. I think a huge chunk of our happiness is based on how we manage the things that zap or pull away or take away from when we're feeling good. Because we're going to experience happiness zappers every single day. And if we aren't managing those, sometimes people think happiness is sort of the absence of zappers. And that's not really true. Happiness is really the management of zappers.
And do you sometimes think that satisfaction and happiness are somewhat synonyms of each other?
Well, satisfaction is actually one of our types of happiness. So I think when we're feeling satisfied, because when we feel satisfied, we feel good. So I do think that is type of happiness, but you may not live in satisfaction all day long. You're probably not going to. Sometimes you may be living in gratitude, or sometimes you may be living in honorable. Honorable is another type of happiness that is sometimes when we meet the moment that we could be honorable and do the right thing, it may be difficult. It may be hard, and maybe we're not feeling great about it in that moment. But an hour or two later, or maybe it's a day later, we're like, you know what? I know I did the right thing, even though it was hard, and we feel good that we did the right thing. So happiness, again, has many different feelings, many different emotions, many different faces, but definitely satisfaction would be one of them.
So can you elaborate on the various aspects of practical happiness?
Well, practical happiness is based on 4 principles. And the first principle is happiness is personal. So you can't expect your happiness to be your significant other's happiness, or your kids' happiness, or your parents' happiness. It's going to be based on you. And sometimes, again, that's based on the moment. So happiness is personal. Principle 2 is happiness zappers are manageable. And I think when we approach things that make us, and we have 5 categories of those, which is unhappiness, stress, fear, chaos, and annoyances. So and in my book, we have what we call a zap map plan. So a zapper management action plan. But if any of those are showing up in our life, if we view them from a point of how do I manage them instead of I'm being somewhat of a victim of them, it empowers us to actually take steps to make us feel good about how do we resolve the issue. And sometimes resolving an issue is just allowing time to let it play itself out. And then the third principle is happiness changes as you change. So what made you happy at 7 may not make you happy at 37. It may make you happy again at 77, because sometimes we go full circle. And that's called getting to be a grandparent. But happiness, again, it's going to change. And those changes are sometimes intentional, and sometimes they just sort of happen. Sometimes we have a life event that happens that changes our perspective on something. We may have been happy in our college years, staying out to 3 or 4 in the morning and then being in class at 8 a.m. And we were still pretty much bright-eyed, as they would say, that we were happy to be there. But when we go get that first real out-of-school job, that first professional job, we may not want to party till 3 a.m. if we have to be at the office at 8, because we may be like, oh, that's I have to do that on the weekend. That has to be that. So sometimes it's age-related. Sometimes it's experience-related. If you have a new baby that comes into your life, sometimes happy just getting an hour's sleep altogether. Those first few weeks, you're like, I got to sleep for a whole hour, and I feel so much better now. It just changes as our life changes. And then the final principle is happiness is bigger than you think. So principle 4, really gets into these 31 types of happiness that the society founded. And we encourage people to just look for those throughout the day. And you usually will find you had more happy moments than you originally thought you did.
So when we are talking about practical happiness and the book which you have written, so what exactly drove you to write this book? And what is the main message you wanted to convey through your book?
I've been studying happiness for 20 plus years. And I think in that 20-something years, we've had a lot of science about happiness that has come out, positive psychology, neuroscience, of brain science, that we moved to this place that we sort of attribute being happy with the absence of things that are just not happy. The things that I call them, again, happiness zappers, because I have 5 categories of them, and unhappiness is one of them. But happiness is not the absence of the unwanted. Happiness still happens despite those experiences. And so I wanted people to have tools that when they're just going through their day and they're thinking, oh, I'd like to feel a little bit happier, they can sort of look at one of these 4 principles, and usually what their experience is can be connected to one of those principles to help them feel a little bit, more happiness, and to feel better about that moment. So maybe that's realizing, like, when you ask your spouse, your significant other, like, hey, I want to go do XYZ this weekend, and they're kind of rolling their eyes, you can kind of respect, like, hey, this is my happiness is personal, but it's not theirs. And that's okay.
Yes.
That's okay. I need to go find somebody else to share that experience with. Or you're dealing with just a happiness zapper. Let's say you woke up and you had a chaotic morning. You can think to yourself, how do I manage this? That becomes your mantra. How do I manage this experience versus I'm sort of a victim to it? It doesn't mean that it didn't happen. It doesn't mean it didn't make you feel bad. It just means you're approaching it from a place of empowerment and of how do I, again, manage it, even if the management is longer term. And then I think where we often lose happiness, and although it's obvious, is happiness changes as we change. Sometimes we're spending our time trying to recreate past happiness. That's never going to happen because we're never going to live in that exact moment again. So how do we stay mindful so that we can embrace the happiness that's happening now? And our past happiness actually becomes nostalgia, which is one of the happiness is bigger than you think. It's one of the 31 types of happiness. We can look back on those memories and go, oh, that makes me feel so good that experience happened. I'm grateful that experience happened.
Absolutely. And I believe in today's world, it's very difficult to find that true happiness amidst the stress and the work life we have. It's very difficult to balance everything. So what do you think makes work happy for the employees in the corporate world?
Well, I think, again, you can go to those 4 principles and it's going to sort of connect with all of them. I think what we find happy in a job is going to change as we change. Sometimes you're trying to move up the career ladder. Sometimes you're trying to, find that work-life balance with your family life and with what's going on in your professional life. So that happiness is personal is going to be fluid. And I think recognizing that, I think a lot of times people get tired of a job and they don't recognize, they want to blame the job, but the job is the job. And sometimes you're just needing a different challenge or or maybe less of a challenge. Maybe you're and we don't live in this world where we say, oh, let me go take a step back so that I can have more work-life balance. And I think happiness zappers are just going to happen, wherever they are. But big picture, most of the time, happiness at work gets down to, is somebody feeling valued at work? Is somebody engaged at work? Is somebody do they feel that their boss, knows who they are? Sometimes they'll have surveys where people haven't even spoken to their leader in weeks. And people want that validation from leaders. So a lot of your happiness at work gets into your culture, what the culture is of an organization. And is that culture one that makes people feel good to be there, even if they have a job maybe they don't like? Sometimes people will stay in a job because they have work best friends. They love their person who's their leader or their manager. They think the world of them. So even if the job tasks itself are not what one would call super fulfilling because it's monotonous or it's boring because you've done it 10 years and so you can do it in your sleep. If you feel good about the culture you're in and you're getting paid fairly and you have, benefits that are competitive to your industry, all those things need to be in place as well. But if you actually feel good about where you are, that is usually what makes employees happy at work.
Yes, the work culture is very important. And like you mentioned, recognition, appreciation is what motivates the workers to work harder and more in a productive manner, right? And that ultimately leads to happiness, discovering happiness in the workplace, I believe.
I think work is one of those things when we feel satisfied, you said satisfaction, and we feel valued. Value is another type of happiness. I think those are 2 real key success is a type of happiness. When we're feeling those things and a culture is supporting those things, and that usually gets down to what I call, most organizations have a big macro culture. So that's where the big leaders put everything in place, like salary benefits, things like that vacation, that needs to happen. But then every single leader is its own microculture. So every single leader gets to go create their own microculture. And that is really what employees are more connected to. It's what does my leader and my team, the team I'm on, how are they making me feel? How is this making me feel regardless of the job task? And then I think again, opportunity to do different things, because again, everybody at some point is going to say, hey, I've been doing this a long time. I'm really good at it, but I now need another, I need another challenge, because when we learn new things, that is another way I'm happy. We keep our happiness. If we get bored, like, hey, I know, that's why always being open, always having a bucket list, always having something that you want to try, whether it's at work or personal, is so important.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Accomplishments, achievements, motivation, satisfaction. I believe all these are minute aspects of happiness.
Yes, motivation. That's motivated is another type of happiness. And inspired. I think at work, a lot of times when an organization is receptive to hearing their employees say, hey, I think if we did XYZ a little bit different, we would be more productive, we'd be more efficient, our customer would have a better experience. I think when those things are happening, I think that, again, it makes the employees feel like they're part of the culture and they're a contributing member, and that always makes them feel good and happier.
Exactly. And how do you think the leaders or the employers can help their employees experience that practical happiness in the workplace? What can they possibly do? Like, even through corporate wellness programs, can they implement something related to practical happiness in their programs and events?
Well, I think practical happiness is about being realistic. So you have to look at your team and really understand your team members. Each individual team member has a different, what you call why. They have a different why they're working. So some people are just working to pay the bills, and then they want to go home and have their happy family life. They're there just for the paycheck. And there's nothing wrong with that. Every organization needs what I call the steady Eddie. They need the person that they can depend on to get their job done. But that person may not be looking for career growth or different things. Then you've got the person who's, hey, I want to be in your position one day. And so that leader, instead of seeing them as competition, needs to really embrace them and help that person grow. So yes, you may lose that person, but maybe they become your peer down the road. So that's their why. Their why is I want career growth and I want to improve my skill set. Somebody else may be just like, I want to do this for a few months, and I want to try sales, and then I want to try account management, and then I want to try marketing. Like they may not know where they really fit, and they want to have those differences. Somebody else might be getting married, and so they're like, okay, how do I get overtime because I'm about to buy some expensive jewelry, or whatever that is for their why, because their why is going to change. And I think leaders, if they stay in touch with that why, that's part of practical happiness. It's paying attention to those changes that their teammates, their teams need. Like if you end up in a space, let's say when your parent is ill and you're having to do parental caretaking, you may need to be in a place that your employer can let you work more from home. So you have that flexibility to fulfill that, to fulfill that caretaking need that is going on in your life. And if your boss is just isn't oblivious to that, the more flexible a leader can be to their employees' needs, also with the organization's needs, but how do you build that bridge? The more flexible that microculture can be, I think that's what leaders sometimes have to think about. It's not necessarily their perspective. So you get to happiness as personal. It's not their perspective they're trying to make happy. It's the team members, their each individual perspective that they're trying to connect with.
And it is very important for the leaders and the managers to be understanding and showing empathy and compassion towards the employees, right? So the employees can feel the comfort and they can confide into their managers regarding whatever they are going through.
Yeah, exactly. When people have that emotional trust, when they can emotionally feel trust with minimally their leader or their organization, it just breeds loyalty, in all honesty. Because when somebody, that their boss has their back, that they can go tell them sort of anything, and they're going to help them navigate that situation and navigate it again so that it's also good, good for the company or the organization. You just naturally want to do a good job for that person, or the vast majority do. You will always have your little HR red flags, but most people, when they start feeling loyal to a person and loyal to an organization's mission, I don't like to use the word work harder, because I don't think work harder is always I don't even think that's the key to productivity, but I do think they become more productive.
Like employee retention and employee loyalty will all come when the employer or the manager is someone whom the employees can trust.
Exactly. That emotional trust is so key. And if that gets lost, if somebody feels they were thrown under the bus, so to speak, because the leader just did that to them, that person's like, that's not making me feel good. That's not making me feel good, and I'm never going to tell you anything ever again.
Absolutely. However, do you think there are certain misconceptions people associate with happiness?
Well, I think we think happiness is this monolithic feeling, i.e. meaning we're just going to feel happy when we're not experiencing the unwanted, whatever's unwanted in our life. So any type of chaos or happiness outburst, as long as that's gone, I'm happy. But that's not really true. You can be in a place that you don't have a lot of happiness outbursts happening. There's not a lot of unwanted going on in your life, and you can also still not be happy. So I think what we always have to remember is, and some people will, when I say happiness is a verb, I get that's in the wrong actual context, but happiness sort of is a verb because it's an action. It's something we have to decide we want to be, and then we take actions to notice when those moments are happening, when moments that make us feel less happy. I think we have to say we're managing those. Like, we know they're going to happen. We expect them to happen. We don't think we're only going to feel happy all of the time. And I think, like I said, we have to sort of, like I said, put effort into our happiness, which includes recognizing it's bigger than you think it is. And that it's one of those, and sometimes we have to seek it. Like, we find ourselves just in a funk. Sometimes we have to say, okay, what makes me feel good? Like, oh, I really like to go to whatever restaurant, or I really like to go take a walk around whatever park. Or, you know what, I haven't talked to my really good friend, whoever, and I'm going to pick up the phone and actually have a conversation, not just a text messaging kind of communication. I'm going to actually hear their voice, because when we hear somebody's voice, it can make us feel good. Or better yet, we can now do FaceTime or Zooms. So I think we sometimes have to say, hey, I'd like to feel a little bit better than I am right now. What is it going to be that does that for me? Maybe it's reading a book, maybe watching your favorite sporting event on TV. It can just be so many different things. But sometimes we actually then have to go do that versus, sitting around in our chair saying, hey, I'm going to be cranky today because I want to. Instead, we have to say, hey, I'm going to go make myself have a better moment.
Yes, absolutely. And these misconceptions, even today, people will often people usually assume happiness to be a very shallow term, to be very honest. So we're just smiling, so we're happy. Nobody sees the depth of the word, right?
Well, yeah, and I think sometimes we fake smile when we're not happy, and I think that actually makes us unhappier. I think pretending to be happy if you're not does not help you. That's why, and we create a ZAP map out of practical happiness. Like, how do we manage those unhappy moments? But if let's say you have legitimate, what I call unhappiness, and that's usually connected to grief. Maybe you had a health change. Maybe someone you loved or a pet you loved passed away, and there's a grief that's connected with that. Sometimes you have estrangements in your family. We have families that you're like, my sister and I are just not talking because we're having whatever. These things happen, and there's a grief that's associated with that. And sometimes we have to just sit and cry. Sometimes we just have to have I'm going to cry, and that's okay, because if we don't acknowledge those times, then then we don't actually manage them. They're managing us because we don't feel good inside, even if we're smiling on the outside. Now, as far as smiles go, I do have to say, if you are having one of those kind of blue days, if you actually just smile at yourself in the mirror, we do kick off all those feel good endorphins. So sometimes smiling can be a booster. Not that unhappiness still isn't going on. Like I said, we can have both. We can have both. We also move to this place with social media that we want to we sometimes think that we need to be, I think, and sometimes maybe too authentic. And so, just because you're having a bad day or you're mad at somebody, you don't necessarily need to go post about it. You don't need to add that energy to it. You still need to work through it so you feel better. And you don't need to be happy, but you also don't have to share that with the world either.
True that. Basically the term happiness is much bigger than we perceive it to be. Right.
Yeah, because I think it's a lot of different feelings and they don't all have the same energy vibration, if you will, for lack of a better word. They don't all have the same, when you're not actually, having fun and you're like laughing really hard, that's a very high vibration type of happiness. But I think when we're in a state of feeling peaceful, like I said, or content or satisfaction, like you said, those are very also important types of happiness, but they may not be at that same high vibration type of happiness. And I think sometimes we think if we're in one of these lower vibration types of happiness, we're not happy when we really are because we're feeling good.
True. So with this, we come to the last question. So Pamela, tell me, would you want to share some more insight on the topic of practical happiness?
Well, I think practical happiness is all about finding realistic happiness. So, in a nutshell, it's managing your happiness zappers, and it is recognizing how big happiness is and how it changes as we're changing and as our lives change and as the world changes. And it's acknowledging that and letting it happen. And in some ways, it's just being mindful to the moment. Like I said, if we're unhappy and we don't acknowledge that those things that make us feel bad, like I said, whether it's stress or chaos or annoyances or fear in our minds. A lot of times we don't do things because we're scared to. If we don't acknowledge those things, we can't really manage them and manage that situation and circumstance, even if it's over a prolonged period of time. But if we are managing those things, we can actually feel good. We have little moments that we feel good while we're managing those things. While they're real. That also doesn't mean happiness isn't happening. And I use two examples that I use this a lot. So universally, everybody agrees that a funeral is usually a sad event. Having said that, people are often sharing nostalgic memories and they can smile when they're thinking about that person's life. And happiness is still happening in the middle of this event. And we think of a wedding as a happy event. Yet, I've yet to be at a wedding that there's probably not some type of chaos that's happening, from family drama to something with logistics for the event. And your happy couple is still happy, but there's still some happiness zappers that are usually surrounding the event. So it can also be a stressful time for the happy couple. And so again, nothing is just 100%. It's this combination of feelings. And that's, it's practical happiness because it's realistic happiness.
That's great. Thank you so much, Pamela, for your insights. I had a great time. I hope you too enjoyed talking about practical happiness with me and sharing all your thoughts. Thank you so much for joining us today.
No, thank you so much for having me on. And I'm so happy to be here with you. And if you ever want to talk about happiness at work again, let me know.
Absolutely. I will let you know. And thank you for sharing all the aspects of practical happiness, which we didn't really know about, and especially how it connects. Basically, when a person is happy, he is also well, right? He's mentally and physically well. He's feeling good and satisfied at the same time. So all through this podcast, all we aim is for well-being and health.
Yes. Happiness is health.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And have a great day ahead.
You too.
Thanks for listening to Vantage Fit Corporate Wellness Podcast. Please do subscribe to Vantage Fit Corporate Wellness Podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and our YouTube channel for new episodes.